Hello and welcome back to another GNA Academy video. Today our topic is the interview and how to effectively record audio and video interviews that will help you tell your news story more effectively. We'll start by explaining the importance of interviews and how short segments drawn from those interviews, often called soundbites, are the building blocks that you'll use to explain the who, what, when, where, and why of your story. We'll explain the importance of research, which is necessary to identify who to interview and what questions to ask. Next, we'll discuss how to write effective interview questions. And finally, we'll look at some of the technical concerns you'll encounter as you record your interviews. So let's get started. Almost all news stories or journalistic stories depend on interviews. Interviews are simply recordings of responses to questions asked of people who are participants, eyewitnesses, experts, or authorities. So if you're telling a story about something that happened an hour ago, or a day ago, or 10 years ago, interviewing people who were there, who observed or were otherwise affected by what happened, their testimony to the facts of the event or their analysis and interpretation of the significance of the event will become the foundational pieces that you will use to build the story. You'll sometimes hear video producers talk about soundbites. Soundbites are short portions of interviews, and they will typically be used, along with a voiceover narration, to tell the story. You can think of a soundbite as the equivalent of a quote for print journalists. In a typical news story, a bit of narration is followed by a relevant soundbite, then another bit of narration to set up the next soundbite, and so on. Here's a short example.
One of the cool things about being in Cambodia is market ladies.
Despite the challenges of adjusting to life in Cambodia, EMI missionaries Ian and Laura found joy in simple things, like visits to the local market.
My favorite is the nut lady because she lets me try everything in her stall. So I get to eat my way through. It's pretty awesome.
And finding their way in the flow of heavy traffic.
At first it seems really chaotic, but there's sort of a rhythm to it. It's very relational and communal, and everyone is working together to make it work.
You probably noticed that the voiceover narration was written in such a way that it added important information to what was said by the interviewees. And it did so in such a way that it created smooth transitions from one soundbite to the next. The voiceover narration is responsible for telling the story, but the interview soundbites add relatability and an emotional or personal point of connection for the audience. So the typical flow of a news story is voiceover narration, soundbite, soundbite, narration, soundbite, narration, and so on. In this manner, a news story is put together in a way that tells the story from beginning to end. But before we can begin talking about interviewing, writing good questions, and other details that we'll cover in this lesson, we need to talk about research. Research can be intimidating, but it can also mean just simply asking a few questions of people who are close to the story. These questions are simply to provide information that you'll need in order to select interviewees and to help you write questions that will get to the heart of the issue. The best interviewers are those who are naturally curious, but also have done sufficient research that they know who to approach and what questions to ask. Research is necessary in order to determine who you're going to interview. To make this decision, you need to understand what makes a good interviewee. At a minimum, they need to be knowledgeable about the story topic, comfortable on camera, and articulate. Once you've selected a person to interview, you need to understand how to approach them to gain their participation, and then how to gain their trust so that they will speak openly and transparently about the event and their personal involvement. As a news reporter, these are all necessary things to consider because the success of your news story will depend on the quality of the interviews, and the quality of the interviews will be determined by the relationship and rapport that you're able to build with the interviewee. Suppose you're reporting on a Christian ministry that is providing aid and assistance to a group of people or a region that has suffered a natural disaster. Obviously, you'll want to record interviews with both providers and recipients of the aid that is being provided. Finding the right interviewee who's part of the team providing relief may be as simple as finding out who is leading the team and asking him or her for the interview. Or perhaps asking the leader to recommend someone on the team who would be able to provide a good interview response. It may be that one member of the team is the public relations or press relations liaison, and this person may be the best choice to get the official perspective. But it may also be true that one of the members of the team that is providing aid is particularly well-spoken and has a powerful personal story that will provide a fresh insight into the relief effort. Next, finding the right person to interview who can speak from the perspective of those receiving the aid may be a bit more challenging. You want to find someone who is fluent in the language that you're using to report the story. Or if not, you'll need to incorporate a translator or rely on subtitles added in the editing process. Here's a short example from a recent trip to Ethiopia.
Dura gooftaa amantaa turte moo amantii ishee akkamitti gammachuu mana kee dhufuu dandeessiste gooftaan taasise.
So how
Disney muka ala jiru murree daasii buufannee isa keessatti namni garmalee baay'ennaan irratti kadhannee karaa lafti as dabarre.
Yeah, when Gammachuu started fellowship with us within our house.
One thing you likely noticed is the additional time required to conduct the interview when using on-site translation. When selecting from potential interviewees, you'll want to choose someone whose personal story is compelling, a story that will connect with the viewers of your report. Is the potential interviewee someone with whom your audience will be able to identify? Is their story easy to understand and relate to? If time allows, you might want to pre-interview possible interviewees on the phone or in person. If you have the time to do this, be sure to make it a fresh experience when you actually conduct the interview for the camera. As they say, you can only strike a match once. One way to accomplish this is to use the pre-interview responses to construct new questions that will be fresh when asked during the on-camera interview. And finally, be sure to consider whether there's any reason why you shouldn't ask a particular person to speak on camera. For example, there may be a cultural reason why having them tell their story would create a difficult or even dangerous situation for them once you pack up and leave. Always try to be sensitive to cultural and spiritual guidance that will keep you from making mistakes that could be costly. So when you're interviewing people who can provide a first-person account, you want to come prepared with questions. And the questions should be structured in such a way that the responses to those questions will provide usable sound bites. Ask questions that will yield responses that can be extracted from the longer interview, but not in a way that does harm to the speaker's intent or takes them out of context. One of the first rules of preparing questions is to ask questions that require more than a simple yes, no, or factual answer. We refer to those as open-ended questions. For example, you wouldn't ask someone, "Were you at home when the flood swept through your town?" Or, "How many children do you have?" Instead, you might ask them to tell you about the flood and how it affected them personally. And you might ask them to tell you about their family and how they are responding to the devastation all around them. The goal is to have them speak freely while keeping in mind that you need short, succinct statements that have a clean beginning and end. To ensure this, you'll need to listen while the interview is in progress for sound bites that will provide a clear statement when lifted out of the longer interview response. And when you hear a response that doesn't quite work, don't be afraid to ask the interviewee to provide their answer again. Sometimes you can just ask the question again in a slightly different way, providing another response that may be more useful when it comes time to edit your story. Here's a good example of a usable soundbite taken from a longer response.
The training that you got in video filming using your phone. Just tell me about the experience and how you think that's going to help you in your ministry. Just a moment.
Okay.
And I want you to look at me right here.
All right.
So turn your body just like that.
Okay.
Exactly.
So the mobile journalism was something that I was interested in so much when I saw the schedule before coming here. Because it was interesting to hear that it is possible to be a missionary but also a journalist at the same time. And so when the team took time to share with us how powerful our smartphones are, it helped me to clearly understand that sometimes we have things that we have potential with but we don't know. I loved the way they talked to us about how you need to look at things step by step, how you need to understand the stories that you want to capture in terms of understanding who you want to talk to, what you need to do. I also love the examples that they gave, especially of that video from Nakuru, Kenya. So the mobile journalism was something that I was interested in so much when I saw the schedule before coming here. Because it was interesting to hear that it is possible to be a missionary but also a journalist at the same time.
Occasionally, you might find it appropriate to use oppositional sources to present a different side of the story. And in these cases, the soundbites in opposition provide alternative perspectives to the event. One person saying one thing, the other person saying something different. In these cases, your narration helps the audience make sense of why these accounts might differ. Some interviews are purely informational, while others will explore emotional and sensitive topics. If you are conducting an interview that will address sensitive issues, be careful to take the time necessary to establish a relationship and build trust. Start with a gentler question and slowly build to the questions more likely to prompt an emotional response. And of course, you need to be prepared to show a tender heart to someone who shows vulnerability in the process of responding to your questions. You may need to offer to pray with them or refer them to a local pastor or counselor who can help them deal with the emotional trauma that surfaced during the interview process. It is extremely important to listen carefully to your interviewee's responses and, when necessary, to introduce a follow-up question that wasn't necessarily part of your prepared list of questions. An interview should be a conversation with give and take, and you can only do that when you're carefully listening to what your interviewee is saying. Another important interviewing skill is to provide nonverbal affirmation as you listen carefully to their responses. Eye contact and a gentle nodding of the head are important to let your interviewee know that you're paying attention and supporting their effort to speak openly and honestly. But be sure to avoid sounds or otherwise stepping on their audio, as that will make editing difficult, and the off-camera sounds from the reporter may detract from the audience. And speaking of audio, if you're alone and do not have an assistant, you should be wearing headphones to monitor the interview to ensure that the audio you're capturing is clean and is faithfully reproducing the testimony of the interviewee. It is usually a good idea to end an interview by asking, "Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about today?" You'll be surprised how often this question ends up providing a great soundbite. The next important decision is to choose a location for the interview. The location should add something to the story, but at least not detract from it. Pick a location where the lighting is sufficient and where the acoustics are good. Try to pick a location where you're not going to have a lot of extraneous noise that's interfering with the recorded audio. If it's an interior space, make sure the acoustics are not working against you. Whether inside or out, making sure the microphone is close to the interviewee's mouth is the best way to overcome background sound or poor acoustics. And speaking of background noise, you might want to ask them to silence their phone so that it doesn't interrupt the audio recording. If you're using the microphone on your mobile phone, you'll want the phone to be within a meter of their mouth when you're filming them. In a quieter location, you may be able to record acceptable audio without needing to use an external microphone, but most of the time it will definitely be better to use an external microphone. Using an external microphone almost always gives you better sound than the built-in microphone in the camera. I'm using a lapel microphone right now for this particular recording, and that means I get good quality at this close distance. But I could also stand 2 to 3 meters further back and get equally good sounding audio. Another decision that you'll need to make is whether to conduct the interview standing up or sitting down. The decision may depend on whether you intend to spend 5 minutes or 20 minutes, or whether the interviewee is elderly or otherwise finds it difficult to stand. When interviewing authority figures, it sometimes means catching them walking or moving through a crowd, and these types of run-and-gun interviews can be quite challenging, but sometimes they provide dynamic sound bites. If you choose to sit down for the interview, be sure to choose a chair that does not swivel or rock. Also, try to choose a chair that promotes an upright posture. Body language is real, and a soft chair that invites the user to sit back and relax will not present a good look for most interviews. Don't have them look anywhere but at you, the interviewer, and you, the interviewer, should be just next to the camera. This will have the effect of them looking just slightly to the side of the camera. The viewer, seeing through the lens of the camera, should be able to see both eyes of the interviewee. That's how we connect with people. Try to make sure they don't allow their eyes to roam around because they can look shifty. They can look less sincere if they're glancing about. Have them try to focus on you, the interviewer. Here's another tip. Try to keep your interviews brief, preferably under 10 to 15 minutes. If you record 20-30 minutes of an interview, you will have to watch and listen to that entire interview while taking notes to ensure and select the best usable sound bites. And that takes time. Also, the more footage that you shoot, the more storage and downloading time needed. Now, with that said, there's also good reason not to be too quick to stop recording once you think the interview is concluded. Once you finish and say thank you, you'll be surprised how often the interviewee will say something very profound now that they feel like the pressure has subsided. If you're still recording, you might get the best soundbite of the entire interview. Just a couple of additional administrative tips before we conclude. At the very beginning of an interview, I'd highly recommend that with your smartphone recording, have them say their name, spell their name, and then, if they have an official title, tell you what that title would be, because it's quite common to put the person's name and title on screen. We call these lower third name super because the text, name, and title are in the lower third of the frame. Here's an example.
Oh, I am Edrin Kawuo Odede, and my name, when I spell it, is Edrine, then Kawuo is Kabugho, then Odede is Odede.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. And your title with UCE?
I am a UCE volunteer in Kasese.
Having the interviewee say and spell his or her name and then tell you their title ensures that you have that information in a place where you can easily find it when it comes time to edit. And finally, make sure that you have the interviewee's consent to participate. Sometimes it's sufficient to simply, with the camera rolling, ask them, "Are you willingly participating in this news recording that we're making for distribution by Global News Alliance?" In some cases, you might have them sign a release form, but for most instances, you can just make sure it's obvious that they're agreeing to participate in what is obviously a journalistic exercise. There is much more that we could say about the importance of the journalistic interview, but for now we'll leave it here. Feel free to contact me at my email on screen or visit the GNA News website and like and follow our YouTube channel for more training modules designed to help you tell the greatest story ever told. Until then, may God bless and keep you.